The gears screamed. It wasn't the rhythmic, comforting hum of a well-oiled machine. It was a shriek, a discordant symphony of brass teeth grinding against iron will. Sparks showered down like angry fireflies, singeing the sleeves of Elias Thorne's tattered coat, but he didn't flinch. He couldn't afford to flinch. To flinch was to lose a second. And Elias had calculated that he had exactly 412 seconds left before the alignment was lost for another decade. The workshop smelled of ozone and stale coffee. A bitter concoction that coated the back of his throat. Every surface in the room, from the floorboards to the rafters, was covered in clocks. There were grandfather clocks that loomed like wooden sentinels, pocket watches scattered like gold coins, and cuckoo clocks that had long since lost their voices. But none of them told the right time. Elias had stopped them all. He had severed their pendulums and crushed their mainsprings because, in this room, he was the only god of time. And he refused to let it march forward without his permission. His hands, stained permanently with grease, and trembling with a mixture of exhaustion and adrenaline, hovered over the central mechanism. It was a monstrosity of copper and crystal, a device he called the temporal anchor. It didn't look like a clock, it looked like a cage. Inside the crystal sphere at its heart, a single, impossible flame flickered, blue and cold, feeding on nothing but the tension in the air. Just a little more. Elias whispered, his voice cracking from days of silence. Hold on. He wasn't talking to the machine. He was talking to the faded daguerreotype, propped up against a pile of stripped gears. A sepia-toned image of a woman with laughing eyes and a young boy holding a wooden toy. Elora and Julian. The photograph was the only thing in the room free of dust. Kept pristine by the reverent touch of his thumb 1,000 times a day. Outside, the city of Athalgard churned on. Through the grime-streaked windows, the muffled sounds of the industrial district blawed in, the clatter of carriages, the shouts of newsboys, the relentless, driving rain that had been falling for weeks. The world outside was obsessed with moving forward. New factories, new steam engines, faster trains, faster lives. They ran towards the future as if it held salvation, unaware that they were merely sprinting toward their own graves. Elias knew better. He knew that the only paradise was the past, and he was going to drag the world back there, kicking and screaming if necessary. He picked up a jeweler's screwdriver, the tip finer than a needle. He had to adjust the escapement wheel by a fraction of a millimeter. If he missed, the tension would shatter the crystal, and the last 30 years of his life would be nothing more than a pile of expensive broken glass. As he leaned in, a sharp knock echoed from the heavy iron door at the base of the stairs. Elias froze. No one came here. He had driven them all away. The creditors, the friends, the concerned neighbors, they had all been casualties of his obsession. He ignored it, his eye pressed against the magnifying loupe. The knock came again, louder, more insistent. Go away, he roared, not looking up. I have nothing for you. No money, no time. Father. The word was quiet, muffled by the thick door, but it cut through the screaming of the gears and the pounding of the rain. It sliced straight through Elias's chest. His hand slipped. The screwdriver goes to trench into the soft brass of the casing. He gasped, dropping the tool. The machine groaned, the pitch of its vibration dropping into a menacing low frequency. He stared at the scratch. It wasn't fatal to the device, but it was a mistake. He never made mistakes. Father. I know you're in there, Julian. Elias stared at the door. He hadn't seen the boy, no the man, in 5 years. Not since the argument at Elora's funeral. Julian had wanted to scatter her ashes in the ocean to let her go. Elias had wanted to keep her urn on the mantelpiece, to keep her close. They had screamed until their throats were raw, and Julian had walked out into the rain, never looking back. Elias looked at the temporal anchor. It was 98% charged. If he left it now, the pressure would destabilize. He would have to start the calibration sequence from zero. It would take 6 hours. I'm busy, Elias shouted, his voice shaking. Go away, Julian. You chose to leave, so stay gone. Silence stretched out, heavy and suffocating. Elias waved, his heart hammering against his ribs like a trapped bird. He expected the footsteps to fade away. He expected Julian to do what he always did, run from the difficult things. Instead, the door handle rattled, and with a groan of rusty hinges, the door swung open. Julian stood there, dripping wet. He looked older. There were lines around his eyes that hadn't been there before, and his coat was threadbare. He held a hat in his hands, twisting the brim nervously. He looked so much like her. The same jawline, the same softness in the eyes that Elias had hardened out of himself years ago. I'm not leaving, Father. Julian said, stepping into the workshop. He looked around. His eyes widening as he took in the chaos of the room. The thousands of dissected clocks, the walls scrawled with mathematical formulas, the humming monstrosity in the center. My God, you're still doing this. I thought the rumors were exaggerated. They are not rumors. Elias snapped, turning his back on his son to frantically check the pressure gauges. They are the work of a genius surrounded by fools. Don't touch anything, I came to tell you something. Julian said, his voice steady despite the overwhelming noise. I'm leaving Aethelgard, for good. I've taken a job on the colonies across the sea. The ship sails at dawn. Elias paused. The colonies were 3 months away by steamship. If Julian left, Elias would likely never see him again. The thought should have terrified him. But then he looked at the blue flame in the crystal. It doesn't matter, the insidious voice in his mind whispered. When you finish the anchor, you can go back. You can go back to before the argument. You can go back to before Elara got sick. You can fix everything. You don't need to say goodbye because goodbye won't exist. Bon voyage, Elias grunted, adjusting a valve. Steam hissed, scalding his knuckles, but he didn't pull away. That's it. Julian took a step forward, anger flushing his pale cheeks. 5 years and that's all you have. Bon voyage, I'm your son. Mom is gone, Dad, she's gone. You can't build a machine to bring her back. You know nothing. Elias spun around, his eyes wild and bloodshot. He grabbed a wrench, brandishing it like a weapon. I am not bringing her back. I am going to her. This machine breaks the tyranny of the arrow, it stops the decay, it stops the loss. I am going to freeze the world in the perfect moment, Julian. The moment before the pain started. Julian looked at this farther with a mixture of horror and pity. And what about the moments after? What about my graduation? What about the day I met my fiancée? What about right now? Does none of that matter to you? Right now is misery, Elias spat, gesturing to the dark, damp workshop. Look at us, we are rotting. Every second that ticks by is a thief. Stealing our strength, our memories, our lives. I am going to kill the thief. You're not killing the thief, Dad, Julian said softly. You're killing the victim. You've spent 30 years locked in this room, but all you've done is waste it. You're an old man now. Look at your hands. Look at yourself in the mirror. Elias looked down. His hands were withered, the skin like parchment paper, brittle bone. He was only 55, but he looked 80. The stress, the lack of sleep, the toxic fumes, they had taken a toll. But it was a price he was willing to pay. It was a trade. His present for his past. I am sacrificing myself for a greater good, Elias muttered, turning back to the machine. The blue flame was growing brighter, pulsing with a rhythmic thrum. You never understand the physics, you never had the head for it. I understand the cost, Julian said. He reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a small rectangular box wrapped in plain paper. He placed it gently on a workbench cluttered with springs. It's your birthday today. I don't suppose you remembered. Elias Blintday. He tried to calculate the date. November. Something. He had lost track of the calendar months ago. He tracked time in pressure cycles and rotations, not days and weeks. I have work to do, Elias said, his voice devoid of emotion. The alignment is in 3 minutes. Julian stood there for a long moment, watching the father he had already lost long ago. He took a deep breath, the air shuddering in his lungs. I love you, Dad. I hope you find what you're looking for. But if you succeed, if you really do freeze time, just remember that you'll be freezing yourself in this room, alone forever. Julian turned and walked out. The heavy iron door clanged shut, the sound echoing like a gunshot finality. Elias was alone again. He stared at the door. For a split second, a surge of panic rose in his throat. He wanted to run after him. He wanted to grab Ewing, to got the fiancé, to ask about the job, to open the small box. But the machine beeped. A high-pitched, piercing tone. The alignment. Elias whirled around. The blue flame had expanded, filling the entire crystal sphere. The gears were spinning so fast they were a blur. The heat coming off the machine was intense, singing his eyebrows. It's time, he whispered. He reached for the main activation lever. It was heavy, cold iron. All he had to do was pull it down. The theory was sound. The Chronos anchor would generate a localized stasis field that would expand outward, halting the kinetic energy of the universe. The rain outside would hang in the air like diamonds. The people would stop mid-step. The sun would never set, and he would be able to traverse the stillness, to walk back through the frozen tapestry of events until he found the day Elara died, and he would simply stay there. He would live in that single day forever. He gripped the lever. But as his muscles tensed to pull, his eyes drifted to the small, wrapped box Julian had left on the bench. It sat there unassuming, a tiny island of peace in a sea of chaotic machinery. It doesn't matter, he told himself. Open it later. You have all of eternity to open it. He pulled the lever. The world didn't stop. Instead it exploded. Not with fire but with sound. A deafening crack, like the spine of the universe snapping. The machine didn't freeze time, it tore a hole in it. A shockwave of pure, distorted temporal energy blasted Elias backward. He flew through the air, crashing into a shelf of grandfather clocks. Wood splintered, glass shattered, and he hit the floor with a bone-jarring thud. Darkness swirled at the edges of his vision. He tried to stand, but his legs wouldn't obey. He looked up at the machine. The crystal had cracked. The blue flame was leaking out, bleeding into the room like liquid smoke. But something was wrong. The smoke wasn't moving. The dust motes dancing in the shaft of light from the window were suspended in mid-air. A drop of oil falling from a gear hung suspended, a perfect golden teardrop that refused to fall. He had done it. Elias gasped, a wheezing, painful sound. He scrambled to his hands and knees. The silence was absolute. The screaming of the gears had stopped. The rain outside had ceased its drumming. He pulled himself up, staggering toward the window. Outside the street was a painting. A carriage was frozen as it splashed through a puddle, the water fanning out in a jagged crown of glass. A pigeon hung motionless in the sky, its wings spread. A newsboy was mid-shout, his mouth open, eyes wide. "I did it." Elias breathed. A manic grin stretching his face. "I stopped it." He turned back to the room. He was the master of this silent kingdom. He could go anywhere. He could go find Alara. He took a step toward the door, but his foot felt heavy. He looked down. His boot was covered in a thick layer of dust. He frowned. He brushed it off, but as his hand touched the leather flaked away like dry ash. He looked at his hand. The skin was translucent, the veins prominent and blue. He watched, horrified, as a liver spot appeared on the back of his hand. Then another, then another. He looked at the smoke was still leaking, but it wasn't just stopping time. It was consuming it. The machine needed fuel to maintain the stasis, and the only fuel source in this frozen world was the one thing that was still moving. Him. The horror of it didn't hit him all at once. It settled over him like the dust that was rapidly turning his coat gray. Elias stared at the back of his hand. The skin wasn't just wrinkled, it was thinning, becoming translucent, revealing the roadmap of brittle blue veins underneath. He watched, mesmerized and terrified, as a fingernail yellowed and curled. He looked up at the temporal anchor. The blue flame was no longer a calm, flickering light, it was a vortex, it was inhaling. The silence of the room wasn't peaceful, it was heavy. A vacuum that sucked the moisture from his eyes and the air from his lungs. The machine was starving, it had frozen the universe, yes. But the energy required to hold back the river of time was infinite. It couldn't draw from the frozen world, so it was drawing from the only dynamic source left, the Creator. "Stop." Elias croaked. His voice sounded like dry leaves scraping over concrete. He coughed, and the sound was weak, rattling in a chest that felt suddenly hollow. He shuffled toward the control lever, his knees popping with the distinct, dry crack of arthritis. Every step was a marathon. He had been 5 minutes ago. Now he felt 80. By the time he reached the machine, he might be 100. By the time he pulled the lever, he might be dust. He reached for the iron handle. His hand shook violently, the tremors of advanced age making it impossible to grip. He swiped at it, his fingers slipping off the cold metal. "No," he wheezed. "Not like this." He collapsed against the workbench. The room spun. The frozen dust motes mocked him, hanging like stars in a dead sky. He looked at the window. The carriage outside was still splashing through the puddle. The newsboy was still shouting. They were trapped in a painting, unaware that their artist was dying in the corner. His eyes fell on the workbench again, on the small brown paper package Julian had left. The birthday gift. Elias reached for it. His fingers were stiff, clumsy claws. It took him an agonizing minute just to tear the paper. Inside lay a small velvet box. He flipped the lid open. It wasn't a watch. It wasn't a compass. It was a small, silver frame. Inside was a tintype photograph. It wasn't of Julian, and it wasn't of Alara. It was a baby, a chubby-faced, wide-eyed infant staring back at the camera with an expression of pure, unadulterated curiosity. Tucked behind the frame was a note, folded into a tight square. Elias unfolded it, his vision blurring. He had to squint, bringing the paper inches from his nose to read the familiar scrawl of a son. "I didn't want to tell you until I was sure. Her name is Clara. Named after Mom. She was born 2 weeks ago. I wanted you to meet her dad. I wanted you to know her grandfather. But I can't let her grow up watching you love a ghost more than you love us. If you ever decide to join the living, here is where we will be." Below the text was an address in the colonies. Elias stared at the baby's face. Clara. She had Alara's eyes. A sob built up in his chest, painful and jagged. He had spent years trying to build a bridge to the past, desperate to see those eyes again. And all this time, they had been waiting for him in the future. He had traded a living, breathing Granner for a cold, silent memory. I am a fool. He whispered, the tears finally coming. But they didn't fall. They clung to his eyelashes, frozen by the proximity to the machine. He looked at the temporal anchor. It was pulsing faster now. The blue light was blinding. He could feel his heart fluttering, a bird trapped in a cage that was too small. He had minutes left, maybe seconds. He could stay here. He could die here, holding this picture, and let the world stay frozen forever. A monument to his grief. Or he could break it. Elias grabbed the heavy steel wrench he had threatened Julian with earlier. It felt impossibly heavy, like lifting an anchor. He gritted his teeth. Teeth that felt loose in his gums, and used the workbench to leverage himself up. He turned to the machine. The crystal sphere hummed, a song of seduction. Stay, it seemed to whisper. It is safe here. No pain, no loss, no life. Elias roared, summing every ounce of strength remaining in his withered body. He swung the wrench. It moved in slow motion, fighting the stasis field. The air felt like molasses. Elias screamed, a sound of pure defiance, forcing his muscles to push past the resistance. He thought of Alara. She wouldn't want this. She wouldn't want him to be a museum guard for her memory. She would want him to hold Clara. The wrench connected with the crystal. There was no sound at first. Just a spiderweb of white fractures spreading across the glass. Then the blue flame sputtered. The vacuum pressure reversed. Boom. The explosion threw Elias backward. He slammed into the wall, the breath driven from his lungs. The workshop filled with a whirlwind of wind and noise. The gears screamed back to life, spinning wildly. The grandfather clocks chimed in a cacophony of confusion. The rain outside slammed against the window pane, a torrential drumroll announcing the return of time. Elias lay on the floor, gasping. He looked at his hands. They were still old. The machine had broken the loop, but it hadn't refunded the price. The time he had lost was gone. He was an old man, lying in the wreckage of his life's work. But he was alive, and the clock on the wall was ticking. Tick, tock, it was the most beautiful sound he had ever heard. He rolled onto his stomach and looked at the clock face. 6:45 a.m. The ship, Julian's ship, sailed at dawn, 7:00 a.m. He had 15 minutes. Elias forced himself up, his joints burned. His back screamed in protest. He grabbed his coat. It hung loosely on his shrunken frame now, and snatched the photo of Clara from the floor. He jammed it into his pocket, right next to his heart. He stumbled out the door, into the rain. The cold water hit him like a shock, waking up his senses. A Thalgard was waking up, carts were rumbling over cobblestones. The smell of coal smoke and wet earth filled the air. Elias didn't walk, he hobbled, moving with a desperate, lurching gait. Make way. He shouted at a carriage, his voice thin but urgent. I have to get to the docks. He ran. It was a pathetic, shuffling run. But it was the fastest he had moved in years. His lungs burned, his heart hammered a frantic rhythm, but he didn't stop. He cut through alleys, splashing through mud that coated his boots. He had spent 30 years trying to stop time. Now he was racing it. The clock tower in the town square chimed the quarter hour. 6:45. No wait, he had misread the clock in the dark workshop. That was the quarter chime. He had less time than he thought. The docks appeared ahead, a forest of masts and steam funnels rising against the gray morning sky. The crowd was thick, family saying goodbye, stevedores loading crates, the chaos of departure. Julian, Elias screamed. The sound was swallowed by the blast of a ship's horn. A massive steamship, black smoke billowing from its stacks, was beginning to churn the dark water. The gangplank was being pulled in. Elias pushed through the crowd. He was knocked sideways by a large man carrying a trunk. He fell hard onto the wet cobblestones, skinning his palms. Watch it, old-timer, the man grunted. Elias ignored him. He scrambled up, mud streaking his white hair. He reached the edge of a pier. The ship was 10 feet away. The gap of dark, churning water was widening. Julian. He scanned the railing. Hundreds of faces looked back, excited, sad, indifferent. He looked for the threadbare coat. He looked for the eyes that matched his own. He didn't see him. The ship picked up speed. The distance grew to 20 feet. 30, Elias gripped the cold iron bollard at the edge of the dock. His chest heaved. He had failed. He was too late. The thief had won. Time had taken this from him too. He sank to his knees, the rain mingling with the tears on his face. He pulled the photo of Clara from his pocket, shielding it from the rain with his trembling hand. I tried, he whispered to the baby. I'm so sorry, I tried. The voice came from behind him. Elias froze. He knew that voice. He turned around slowly, afraid that his mind was finally snapping, that this was a hallucination born of grief. Julian was sitting on a wooden crate under the shelter of a warehouse awning, 10 yards away. His trunk was beside him. He wasn't on the ship. Elias stared, his mouth opening and closing, no words coming out. Julian stood up. He looked at the ship disappearing into the fog. Then looked back at his father. He took in the sight, the mud, the torn clothes, the accelerated age, the utter exhaustion. His eyes softened, filling with a complex mix of relief and sorrow. I missed the boarding call. Julian said, his voice thick with emotion. I couldn't find my ticket, must have left it somewhere. He hadn't lost his ticket. Elias knew it. Julian had waited. He had given his father one last chance to be a father. Elias tried to stand, but his legs finally gave out. He slumped forward. Julian was there in an instant. He caught his father before he hit the ground, his strong arms wrapping around the frail trembling body. I've got you. Julian whispered into his ear. I've got you, Dad. Elias buried his face in his son's shoulder, sobbing uncontrollably. He smelled the rain, the wool of Julian's coat, and the faint scent of tobacco. It smelled like life. I saw her. Elias managed to choke out, clutching the photo between them. I saw Clara, she's beautiful. Julian pulled back slightly, looking at his father's aged face. He touched the deep wrinkles on Elias's cheek with a gentle hand. You look different. I spent it, Elias said, a weak smile breaking through the tears. I spent all my time, but I saved enough for now. We can catch the next ship, Julian said, hoisting Elias up, supporting his weight. There's one next week. You can come with me. You can meet her for real. Elias nodded. He looked back at the city, at the workshop tower visible in the distance. He thought of the broken machine, the millions of gears, the years of silence. He felt lighter than he had in decades. I don't have forever, Julian, Elias said, leaning on his son as they began to walk away from the water, back toward the living world. But I have today. And today is enough. The rain began to slow, the clouds parting just enough to let a single shaft of pale morning sunlight touch the cobblestones. It didn't freeze the moment. It didn't last. It shifted and faded as the world kept turning, beautiful and fleeting, just as it was meant to be. We often treat time like an enemy to be fought, or a resource to be hoarded. We run so fast toward the future, or look so longingly at the past, that we forget the only moment we truly possess is the one happening right now. Don't wait until the sand in the hourglass has run to gold, wasn't in the glass. It was in the people holding your hand. If this story touched your heart, subscribe to Daily Motivation Tales for more tales that explore the human soul. Remember, every second is a gift, spend it wisely.